Alrighty, we're having a little bit of a sound issue, so we're trying something a little creative where we're going to be live on StreamYard and Frank and I have our cell phones on. So drop a note in the comments and let us know if the sound is working properly for you. Just want to make sure that there's no weird echo noises coming through. Welcome to our May episode of Voice of Supply Chain. This is a show we host every single month to bring on guests who are doing extraordinary things in the industry and maybe have not been super public facing about their stories and their careers. I am joining today from Danville, California, SF Bay area. Our weather is absolutely incredible. I'm looking outside and it's like in the 70s, and I'm excited to get some hiking gear on and head out and enjoy some sunshine later today. So today we're going to have a little bit of a different type of episode. I think there's a lot of craziness going on in the world with all of the political tensions and issues. And offshoring is something that I've become more and more interested in particular, how companies can better manage risk with all of the political craziness happening in just about every single country. So Frank is somebody who has spent a large portion of his career helping organizations stand up procurement organizations and do offshoring in India. And so I wanted to have him come on and share his expertise today about a very different type of subject, something that we've never really covered on this show before. So with that, drop us a note in the comments and tell us where in the world you are joining us from and something that's top of mind for you this week as it relates to offshoring. So if you have a specific situation you're experiencing or a specific topic that you'd like to have us dive into, again, Frank's expertise is specifically in India. So if there's something specifically in that country that you'd like to talk about, drop that a note in the comments as well. So, Frank, before we dive into specifics around offshoring in India, I like to have all of our guests give us a little bit of history about where they came from and how they've become who they have. So, you have had a very, very interesting career. And one of the things that's most fascinating to me is that you grew up in a very, very entrepreneurial family and kind of got thrown into the business world at a very young age. So let's start with where you grew up.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I apologize for the auditorial issues that we had, but I think we're going to work through this. I grew up originally in Germany, in the Frankfurt Rhine-Main area. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that term. Due to the US base that used to be stationed there and moved a little bit further east. My family had hotels and restaurants in Germany. And, I grew up in a commercial kitchen. I was whizzing around and playing in the kitchen, literally. And and as I grew up, of course, I wanted to help. Kids always want to help. And I started to help when I was very little. And then as soon as I could work legally, I started working there, and I became part of the staff. Had to learn my chops there and earn their respect because even though I was the son of the owner, you still had to earn their respect and pretty much outwork them. And it really helped me to enter the workforce because you see things from the side of an owner, of a business owner, like how do you have to manage your cost? How do you have to manage your inventory? How do you manage a vendor when they bring supplies to the business, and all the little things that can go wrong if you don't pay attention.
So I have so much respect for people who work in the hospitality industry. Mm-hmm. I think it's probably one of the most challenging industries to work in. High costs, labor turnover is crazy. It's hard to find talent. It's hard to keep talent. You're working on razor thin margins. I come from an entrepreneur family as well, and my uncle owned a meat and cheese distribution company. They actually had a storefront in Fort Bragg and did distribution throughout California. So not exactly the same as you, not hotels, but did a lot of work in the restaurant space. And I think growing up in that environment, you learn probably a lot of things quickly that other children do not. What would you say are some of the key takeaways, or maybe some of the things that you came to respect at a very appreciated at a very young age?
Certainly that hard work does pay off. And also that the client is king in the sense that they pay your bills, so you have to really accommodate them and you have to listen to what they want. And that your staff, the people who are working for you, are equally important. And you have to treat them with respect if you want them to treat your clients or your customers with respect. And also that it doesn't matter where they come from. They're there to do a job, and what color, what background, what culture, you have to embrace that and you have to make it work. And like you said, with a lot of turnover comes a lot of exposure to a lot of different cultures, and so you end up having to deal with their intricacies and their very special ways of doing things.
Yeah, it's like a crash course in personality management and learning
Yeah.
how to work with all different types of people. I think
Mhm.
that's something that I took away from my uncle's business as well. So you were hustling and bustling working in your dad's business, and then you decided to stay in the industry for your college and post college. So
Yeah.
tell me about your education path. It's again kind of different than a lot of other people we've had on the show.
So in Germany, they have the thing that's called an apprenticeship, where you actually learn on the job. And so you go through the different stations, and companies do this because they like to promote from inside rather than giving you a 3-month trial period, where it's like hit or miss. They hire you on and they invest in you for 3 to 3.5, sometimes 4 years, depending on what kind of craft you're choosing or trade. And in the hotel, I worked for Hilton. It was a 3.5-year apprenticeship, and there are two paths. One is the operational path, where you're front of the house, restaurant, your wait staff, and so forth, or back of the house, accounting, management, IT. And I chose the management route because I had done the operations back at my family's business, and it also suited me better. And that so you do that, and you go to school at the same time. So you do both at the same time. It's a little bit like a D1 student, where you have to go play your sport and still be in school. But it really helps you because you become an integral part of the operation of the hotel. Like our team of apprentices there. So you have three levels of apprenticeship, right? The first year, the second year, the third year. And you pass on a lot of knowledge as you go through the 3 years, and you absorb a lot of knowledge from the people ahead of you. And I had some very unique experiences. And they also, I was lucky enough to actually be being pulled into an opening of a new Hilton within the same city. So that, opened a whole new world of insights and learning for me.
So for those that are joining us, and I see we've got David Hunt joining us from sunny Las Vegas. Hello, David. I was in Vegas for the ISM conference and a podcast recording a couple weeks ago, and it was 85 and absolutely beautiful. I worked on my tan. We've got Walla joining us as well. For those that may not be familiar, is an apprenticeship similar to a kind of a glorified internship where you're
Yep.
actually working, in the real world in conjunction with going to school?
Yeah, you learn on a job, you're not paid anything, and you have to do everything. But it's good. You're being thrown in the cold water, and basically you have people, of course, who teach you. There's usually a process that you have to follow. People show you how it's done, and they yell at you if it's not done the right way, of course. Those are all the experiences that you go through. But it was very educational, absolutely. I pretty much lived at the hotel.
So a very close friend of mine, who was actually my one of my mentors when I graduated from college, his name is Alon, and I should have pinged him to join because he would have loved this conversation. But he was very high up at Marriott and
Hmm.
opened many of the Marriott properties, and him and his wife lived in Marriotts for most of their career because he was opening a hotel and living there. So very different lifestyle when
Hmm.
you're going to the gym or going to the pool, and the entire staff and everybody knows your business and knows who you are, and you're seeing guests when you're walking around, so it's kind of hard to mesh when you live and work in the same place.
Yes. Yeah. It's a 24/7, 365 job.
So you and it did you say it was a 3-year program, the apprenticeship and the education piece?
Correct. Yes. And then you graduate in school with a diploma. And at work, if you're lucky, you get a bottle of champagne, but normally you don't get anything.
Funny graduation timing. My boyfriend's daughter, his oldest, just graduated from Chico State on Sunday, and so I just lived through a graduation and 2 days of partying and hanging out with the college grads. So, looking back at your college experience, again, very different because you were not in what I would call a traditional college sense. What would you do differently if you popped back in time and started that program again today?
Honestly, I wouldn't do anything different. The friendships that I made there, some of them are still in existence today, and it also launched my consulting career. So to give you a little bit of background, the person who I'm still in contact with actually drew me into IT. It was just at the time when the mainframes went away and the desktop PCs became popular. And because we opened a second hotel, we basically connected both hotels together uh, with a fiber optic cable and had a central reservation. But each of the hotels had their own point of sale system, front desk system, and so forth. And as part of the pre-opening team, I actually was tasked with installing all the systems in both hotels. And the experiences that I learned there or gained there were very instrumental for decades to come.
So you were
Uh,
kind of an IT geek as well.
yes. Hmm.
Yeah, kind of it comes full circle with the work you've done with in the ERP space and in particular Oracle. Waldid is joining us from Rochester, New York. Thanks for being with us today. So, what did you do? So, you had your 3-year program. So, you got a lot of hands on experience. You got to help open a new hotel, which
Hmm.
is big. What did you think you were going to do after college?
Well, I worked in a hotel. Obviously, I was going to work in a hotel, right? I was going to work my way up to become general manager. That was the pinnacle of my world at that time. And then my father, who had also obviously been in the hospitality industry, one of his friends was a big wig at Intercontinental, and he pointed out that there's a joint program between ESSEC, which is the Ivy League in France, and Cornell University, and that's a hotel program in Paris. And he gave me the paperwork to apply, and I filled it out. Thought I was never going to get in there. I don't have the chops to do that. But they invited me to an interview, and I ended up going to that program,
So
and
when
that
you
opened my
say
world.
that program, you mean you did the master's program at Cornell?
Yes, it's a joint program between ESSEC and Cornell. Yes, but it was a master's program. Yes. Mhm.
Okay. So you kind of did it because you didn't think you were going to get in. And you did. So what what did you learn from that program? And an MBA is an interesting topic. I ask a lot of guests this because I sometimes think getting extended education is a bit overrated and can
Mhm.
get people in significant debt, and the careers that they're choosing are never going to offset that expense. Now, there's the counter argument. My sisters, most of them have masters, and they chose careers that are very high paying, and the master's program specifically correlated with an increase in income. So,
Mhm.
curious to kind of hear your thoughts on the whole MBA program that you chose to do.
The exposure and the connections that I made there are still in place today. We had basically the grandson of the founder of Marriott walking through our halls. The same with people from Starwood, from Hilton. We had all the big guys coming through. And we could talk to them like normal people. It was not like, oh, I want to have a job or I want something from you. They came to teach us, and they were happy to share any kind of knowledge or connections they could provide. And then the friendships amongst the peer group is still in existence today. We still have a WhatsApp a group where we meet regularly, and every time I fly to Paris, I can call up a bunch of people and we have dinner together. So there's continuous
Mhm.
there's a continuous relationship with a lot of people. On top of that, it really opened doors into consulting for me. So right out of school, I started as a consultant, implementing hospitality technology systems, yield management systems in particular. And that also brought me here to the US, and from there onwards, then into Oracle and so forth. So it was a real stepping stone for me.
Yeah, I did not come up with this phrase, but it's one of my favorites. Your network is your net worth.
Hmm.
And the people that you surround yourself with are very instrumental in how your life, personal and professional life, turns out. I
Yeah.
have found.
And that's really what you pay for with a master's program, and even with a good college, you pay for the alumni network.
Mhm. So you said right after you got your MBA, you started in consulting, which I would say is a little unique as well. A lot of people that I know that go into consulting will go on to the practitioner side first. Now, you could argue you kind of got that experience as a kid on the quote practitioner side, but a lot of people will go and work 5, 10, 15 years first as a practitioner and then pivot into consulting. You just went straight into it. What do you wish you would have known for any of those that are with us live today that are maybe thinking about pursuing consulting and procurement or supply chain at some point? What do you wish you had known right at the beginning?
Right. It was actually a little later when I became an independent consultant. So I was no longer working for a company, but I was an independent consultant uh, doing enterprise software work. And while I was an employed consultant, it was great. I loved it. You fly to places, especially when they're young, right? It's a great lifestyle. You go everywhere, you see everything. People think you're important, and you do important work. But then when I became an independent consultant, it was really difficult because you have the feast and famine issue. And so you have to figure out how, in your industry, how can you find these long-term contracts? And that's the difficult piece, because as a consultant, you don't think about that at first. So now you become a salesperson. And that's a very different gig than being a consultant.
Yeah, it's two very different skill sets.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends in the sales and marketing space that have tried to go out on their own and do consulting, and they absolutely said, "This is not for me." I
Mhm.
mean, very quickly on, because the sales piece was just not something they enjoyed doing. And even when you have a full workload, you still have to be thinking about, okay, when this project ends or this assignment ends, I've got to go always be selling, because you never know what's going to happen in the pipeline.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So your first gig, you worked for a larger firm. I think you said it was about 18 months where you were traveling all over the world. What was the biggest lesson you learned in that first consulting role in those first, 18 months or so?
That integrity is paramount. You really have to say what you do and do what you say. If you do that, you're better than 95% of the consultants out there. And so you have to be very transparent with your clients. And it really goes both ways, or it really bodes well, because you're actually, and I hope people don't get this wrong, you're a babysitter. When you work with clients, they don't do what you do every day. So you kind of have to help them along the way. And you have to be very, very gentle. And you have to be very careful not to tread on their ego. Because people are very insecure when they can't express something. And you have to kind of pull it out of them and make them feel comfortable to make a mistake. And once you get that, the communication really opens up. And you can really start accomplishing something. And that was hard to understand at first, because you think you know everything, in your mid-20s, and you show up there. And I had to pull back really fast.
You had what I call a reality check.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, because at these big schools, you're being told, you're it. And so when you come out there, everybody wants you. Like, not quite sure.
An ego won't get you very far in consulting.
No. But then once you drop that, it's very enjoyable, really.
So you said that you wanted to work in the US. That was a kind of a bucket list item for you. Why were you so interested in pivoting and doing work in the US?
Well, the US was the first stop for me. Then I wanted to go to Asia, then to Africa, Australia, and then back to Europe. But I got stuck in the US. And stuck is a bad word, right? No, I love it here.
You came here and never left.
Exactly, yes.
So how did you land your first gig in the US? That's kind of a hard transition to make.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it was. My wife at that time, she was in the same industry. And I had a knack for that type of work. And so I just threw my hat into it, and I worked through the valley of tears where nothing happens, and then suddenly it just opened up. Yeah, there was a true demand for that expertise, and I stuck with it, and it worked out.
And when you say that expertise, what expertise are you referring to?
Oracle Enterprise implementation. So Oracle has a middleware stack that has most of the applications for supply chain, for example, or accounts payable, accounts receivable, content management, invoice management, anything. And I implemented all of those systems for almost 20 years.
So companies said, I want to buy Oracle. They would hire your firm to be the implementer and then potentially provide ongoing support.
Yeah, that would have been great if it would have worked that way. Unfortunately, a lot of companies have to go through one or two cycles before they are willing to actually work with an expert. And again, I don't mean this in a bad way. This is just how it usually works. So they start a project and they bite off more than they can chew.
Meaning, of course, we can do it in-house. We have expertise. Our team is very talented, not realizing the extra workload and all the things that they don't really know about Oracle.
Or hiring somebody who says they can do it, but actually doesn't have the background to do it.
Yeah.
And also doesn't help the client to chop up the project into manageable pieces. but rather they want to do everything at the same time. And then the might as well comes in. Well, we might as well do this and might as well do that. And rather than building up momentum, they just throw everything at the project and then they hope it works out. And you may not be aware, but 80% of all projects fail. 80% of all
When
IT
you say
projects
all
fail.
projects, you mean IT projects in general or Oracle implementations?
No, IT projects in general. They either over budget or over time, or they just stop halfway through. They never make it till the end.
80% is a scary number. I'm
It is.
afraid to even ask what the number behind that looks like.
Yeah. No, but but then it doesn't mean that the project cannot be salvaged, right? So I was usually the fixer. They brought me in and say, oh, we had already 2 consultants here, and what can we do here? And so we scaled everything back, we built a base, we built up momentum, and then we could start building on top of that and bring the rest of the organization in. It's really important to understand how fast your organization can work with change. If you overestimate that, and people are very reluctant to change, it's going to create a problem. And so it's a top-down approach, really, but also one where you have to find heroes or sponsors that pick up the product and then show others how to use it.
So change management tip, if I'm hearing you correctly, is find your champions, win them over, teach them, train them, and then they can help win over the rest of the team.
Yes. And then incremental improvements. Bring the business into the fold. Keep the communication open, show them what you're doing, and then incorporate their feedback. And keep things simple and practical. And then you can actually build over time. You can build out a really, really big implementation where the whole organization can benefit from it.
So you switched companies in the middle of should we call it a downturn? In the middle of a recession. Why the pivot?
I think you're referring to, I'm trying to help me out here. The change to.
So you switched to a company that was creating optimization systems for maps, if I recall.
Yeah. Okay. So yes. So those were business rules. They had very sophisticated business rules, but it was located in California. I have nothing against California, but it didn't work for me because I couldn't buy a house there. So I wanted to go back to Minnesota. And that's when we really started to do independent work. So we created a company, and it took us about a year, almost 2 years, before the business really started picking up. But yeah, it was right after the .com crash. That was very sobering.
So after the .com, you're like, screw it, I'm going to try to start my own thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And why did you think you wanted to have your own consulting practice versus working for someone else?
Well, for economical reasons, of course. And there was also some ego, but even if you work for a company, it's work at will, right?
Absolutely, it is.
There is no guarantee that you can come back tomorrow and have a job. And so I'm like, well, if I have the same risk, why not do it on my own account? And it was just a little bit more exciting to think about having your own company rather than working for someone else.
And then the company that you started was specializing in Oracle implementations, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then your focus was on middleware technology. Could you
Correct.
explain a little bit what that means?
Yeah. So Oracle has a database. Then Oracle bought some really big companies, ERP systems, and then they have the middleware stack, which kind of glues everything together. That's also where you do have some supply chain solutions. You have content management. You have a lot of different building blocks that you can use to build all kinds of things. And that was the exciting part for me too.
Like it makes me think of Legos, right?
Yes, correct.
You have
Yeah,
your Lego set and you're building and
yeah,
crashing it down and making something new.
yeah. And so the beginning of the conversation with the client was always, so what would you like to accomplish? And let them tell the story, right? We need a 24/7 accounts payable system. One of the largest reinsurance companies, they wanted to have a system like that. And so I was brought into the fold in order to build something where someone in the UK could submit an expense report and be paid within 24 hours because the information traveled around the world, and the different departments in the different countries would then basically process the accounts payable request.
So we've got Evan joining us from New Jersey. Hello, Evan. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I think he's joined a few of our other shows. For those of you that are joining more recently, drop us a note in the comments. Tell us where you are joining us from. And then if you have a specific question around offshoring or a story or example that you want to drop in the comments, feel free to do so as well. So, Frank, I want to now pivot and talk about how you got so involved with offshoring in India, because I think that's a really important part in your career. And now I want to really dive into and provide hopefully some new information and insights to our audience today around why people should really consider India and how to go about doing that. So, how did you get so much experience working with organizations moving procurement to India?
Because Oracle is not a cheap product, and only large companies usually can afford them. And they are usually global companies. And so we had to work with the entire workforce around the world, which included India, of course. And then just in the South Central Asian area, there are a lot of countries like Malaysia, for example, Thailand, and so forth, where a lot of companies have operations that have to do with accounting or back office processing. Yeah. And in India, especially, there are a lot of developers. So you have to deal with the development staff. I remember one company, they had over 10,000 developers in India. It was an insane amount. And they wanted to have a system that allowed all the Indian developers to upload all their code in one go into one system. So at the end of their day, so between 5 and 8 a.m. Central Time, you would have 10,000 developers upload code. It was absolutely insane. And that was at the beginning of, or mid 2000s. And the technology wasn't quite there yet to allow that much data to come through. Well, we figured something out, but it took a while. And it was
I'm
very
sure there was
interesting.
a lot of breaking things for that company.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's part of it, right? You build something and you encourage them to break it so that you can fix it properly. Yeah.
So, one of the things that really stood out to me when you and I were prepping for our interview today, and I actually have it in my notes bolded, you said, I am shocked. India is booming, and I am shocked how little this is being written or talked about. So, you have a belief that more companies should really consider offshoring and moving procurement purchasing to India. Let's start with, why is it not talked about? Why is it not known? Why are we not hearing more about this?
I can only speculate, but it's probably the economy is doing fairly well from a corporate perspective. We are in an election cycle. And there's also, of course, the world's biggest election going on in India at the moment. There are about 1 billion people electing their new leader, which is probably going to be Modi. But think about it. There's 1 billion people voting right now. That is incredible. So there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. And I think people are not really open to absorbing what's going on in India, even though now is the time to be there. There's so much money being made available. The economical and the political climate are very favorable for companies to go there. And of course, there are companies, few, but there are a few that have experience with helping American or Western companies to get established in India.
So if I am responsible for offshoring at my company, I'm in a more senior role, and I'm looking at my 2024 and 2025 strategy. You talked a little bit about why India should be considered, but what sort of research should I be doing to say, yes, this is something that might make sense for our company?
Doing research on your own in India is probably not going to be very fruitful. The information you get is very inaccurate. You really have to be double checking everything and cross-referencing, and it's very difficult to do from here. There is something that, what I suggest is you go to a company that can do a market check. You tell them what your expectations are, and they can dip their toe in the water and they can figure out whether or not that actually makes sense at all. And then the next thing would be to do a real market research project where this company goes and really go into depth in figuring out whether all those numbers would work out. Another discussion should also take place to figure out what is the time horizon. Because oftentimes when a Western company thinks it should take them 3 or 4 years in India, it might take them up to 8 years. Unless they work with somebody who can clear some of the obstacles that are in the way. Because there's a lot of bureaucracy in India. And it is very, very important to be local. If you can't be there, it's not very easy for every company to send somebody over there and just be local, because there's a cost associated with that, right? But you can use an agent to do that for you.
When you say be local, you literally mean having a physical person or people in India working on doing research and then potentially setting up the operation.
Yes, or have an agent who can do it for you. So if you have representation, but somebody who works on your behalf, not somebody who has some hidden interest, that are not clear from the beginning. I say that very carefully because you can run into a situation where you meet somebody at the trade show and they tell you, oh yeah, I know everybody in India and I can help you, not a problem. And then 6 months later, you find out that that's probably not going to happen.
False advertising.
Yes. Yeah.
What types of programs do you think, and I know this is a very broad general question, but what types of programs do you think are more successful in India? For example, I've spent my last 3 years working in the mid-manufacturing space.
Mm-hmm.
Are there certain verticals or categories or types of things that you think are more successful than others in being done in India?
Yeah, that's a difficult question again. Everybody says how big the market is in India, right? But that's one of the things that needs to be verified. Because just because you may have a market for your product here in the US doesn't mean that the same market exists in India, even though it is large. There are certain income groups that exist in India, but they're still not as large as in the US. So especially if you have a consumer product, right? Or can you sell online over there? That's also not a given. So there are a lot of questions, and that's why it really makes sense to talk to somebody with experience in this. I would say if you are a fairly large company with a manufacturing plant here, with a budget for India, and with enough staying power, you can make it work in India, and it can be very favorable economically. But it really takes some careful planning and also the consideration of how you're going to sell. Are you going to sell in India? Are you going to sell in Asia? Or do you want to bring the product back to the US? What's the approach? Why are you going to India?
So I'm an organization that has a lot of my offshoring done in China, and I'm bringing back the product here to resell in the US. How do I know if moving some of my production or most of it from China to India, for example, might make some sense if I want to diversify my supply base a bit?
Right. The tariffs are probably more favorable in India now. The cost of labor is also more favorable.
More favorable than what? Than China or the
Than
US?
China and the US for sure, yes. It depends on what kind of labor you're looking for. There are a lot of very educated people in India, but still it depends on what kind of product you want to produce in India. Now, when it comes to patents or intellectual property, that's when China is actually better than India still.
And why do you say that?
It has happened. So we've had a few clients where the patents suddenly disappeared and they were used against them. And then we had to help them to re-enter India with a totally different company structure. And that happened because the business partner turned out to be having their own agendas. So it was a large wind turbine manufacturer who partnered with a company in India, and they started to steal their intellectual property and all their patents and then drag them into the court system. And for 2 years, that company couldn't do anything. So we stepped in, we helped them to get out of the court system, renegotiated all the suppliers, found them a good business partner, and secured their patents, and also secured the whole company structure so they stayed in control.
So interesting. I don't think I would have anticipated you saying that the patent work you actually think is still better suited for China. I'll be curious to see how that transpires over the next couple of years in India, if there's a pivot in the market there.
It really depends on how you set up your company and who you work with. So that's why I'm saying you need to do a lot of due diligence, and that's a little bit more difficult, I think, than in China. The Chinese might be more focused on doing business rather than misappropriating your intellectual property. Yeah. But it's good to be in both places. It's not a one or the other. I think COVID showed us that we do need to evolve in how we look at globalization. And India is definitely a location that needs to be considered. It's not the only one, but it has huge potential.
So I would probably say that most of this audience for this show is probably would probably fall most along the lines of outsourcing procurement to India. So it's they've already either got an outsourced team in another country, or they're looking to offshore and move more work over. Getting something set up. So let's say we decide we definitely want to do something in India. What should people know if they are really looking to set up a full-blown outsourcing procurement function there?
Right. I get back to what I said before. You have to do due diligence and find the right business partners over there. Procurement partners, supply partners, representation, all of those things, because you can't be there all the time. Large firms, for example, they send an expat over there for 3.5, 4 years. That person sets up the operation. Then an Indian manager is hired, and that person then takes over and runs it. But then the organization is in good enough shape that someone local can take over. And that really makes sense then at that point, because they actually know much better how to deal with their staff than someone from the West.
Mm-hmm. How should you be setting up and tracking success? Let's say we set up this function. We're 3 or 4 years in. What does success look like? What should we expect?
Hopefully, you know your numbers on a regular basis. So what I mean by that is that you have total insight into what's going on in India. So there has to be a system in place that you actually get the information that you require in order to manage remotely. Right? So that's just from a managerial point of view. But also, how is your company evolving? Have you hit a plateau, or are you continuing to grow? Because what happens is that when you have the wrong partner, they get to a revenue level where they're very comfortable, and then they don't want to do anything anymore. That's why I'm saying you have to be very careful on who you do business with.
Meaning a motivation challenge where good is good enough.
Or they found a better opportunity somewhere else and they just string you along. And I don't want to scare anybody. Quite the opposite. I'm providing this information so that you are going in with the right expectations. You have to get this part done properly. Very important to start off on the right foot. Just a tidbit. A company in India is run by the board of directors. It's not run by the CEO or a president or something like that. And a board of directors always needs 2 parties. And in order to retain control from the American company, they should have 99% of their shares in the company that owns the subsidiary in India, and 1% to a person, probably the president of the company or the owner of the parent company. Because if you then take on new partners, and again, you give them 1% of the shares so that they can vote, you still will retain ownership the entire time. So what I'm saying is, if that's not set up properly, then you can lose ownership within a split second if you want to do a 50-50 split, for example. Yeah. And directors are also personally liable in India for anything that goes wrong with the company. That's another reason why the shares need to go into a US holding company rather than holding the shares individually.
So I'm curious what that looks like being run by a group of people. You said the board runs the company, not the CEO. Yeah. So the CEO then, is that fair to assume, is more of the figurehead of the organization?
It's an operational position. It's more like a CEO, or so they call the managing director, because usually that person is also part of the board. And that's another person that needs to be carefully selected. And so everything needs to be selected carefully, and that takes time. That's why you have to be in India in order to make the personal connections. one of our experts used to be the chief of Lufthansa in Delhi. And he was telling us a story that it took him 2 years to establish a relationship with the Minister of Transportation in order to get additional airplane slots at the Delhi airport. For 2 years, he did not ask for the business, only until the minister said, "Would you like to have an extra slot? That would be nice."
I don't know if I would be cut out for that type of patience.
Yeah, that's why you have an agent. Yeah, you work with somebody who knows what they're doing and who have been doing this for a lot of other companies.
All right, we are at our Spitfire round where I'm going to ask you a few questions and you're going to answer with the first word or phrase that comes to mind.
Okay.
Accomplishment you are most proud of.
Becoming a U.S. citizen.
Quality you admire most in yourself.
My integrity.
What's your dream?
My dream. Helping 1,000 companies from the US to get established and be successful in India.
That's a very, very specific dream.
Yes.
Biggest pet peeve?
Usually people who waste my time.
Favorite thing to do in your downtime?
Cooking and eating with friends and family.
And bucket list item you plan to check off your list by the end of this year?
So I have 2 trips planned, going to Portugal and going to Dubai. And both were high on my bucket list.
All right. For those that have additional offshoring questions around India, setting up operations, what that's all about, I recommend that you reach out to Frank on LinkedIn to get any additional questions answered. Again, he's a wealth of knowledge and has been doing this for a very long time. A little bit change in the schedule for next month since I'm actually going to be also jet setting. And I'm going to be going to Australia for the first time for the last 2 weeks of June. So our show is actually going to take place the first week of June on the 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Wishing everyone a wonderful afternoon.